Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of the Great Black Speakers Podcast, where we connect through conversation. I am your host, Lawrence Watkins. I am the founder and CEO of Great Black Speakers Bureau. I'm also the president and chief operating officer of the Black Business School. Today, we have a very special guest. I saw her do another interview with a think tank that I really love called New America. Her name is Dr. Marcia Chatelain. And Marcia is is a associate professor of history and African American studies at Georgetown University, and she's also the author of Franchise: The Golden Arches in Black America. And today she's here really talking to us about the franchising industry, the history of it, and how it's impacted Black America throughout the last few decades. And the title of today's presentation is How Franchising is the Economic Engine of the Black Community. So, Marcia, Dr. Chatelain, how are you doing today?
Good. How are you? Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. And, as I said, I checked you out on YouTube on another interview where you're going very in-depth about your book. So for people in the audience who may not be familiar with your work, can you explain in terms of what you currently do and how you've gotten to this point in your career?
Yeah, so I am a professor of African American life and culture at Georgetown University. Previously, I was at the University of Oklahoma in Norman, and my research often focuses on stories of Black America that are sometimes hiding in plain sight. So my first book, Southside Girls, Growing Up in the Great Migration, looked at the importance of girls and young women to Chicago's Great Migration, and it really helped people understand the importance of Black girls to the motivating process, as well as the dreams of the Great Migration. My recent book, Franchise: The Golden Arches in Black America, is an examination of how McDonald's franchising came to Black communities in some surprising ways that we often don't think about in terms of business history when we think about McDonald's. So I really want to focus on how McDonald's became Black in the late 1960s and how that entry of franchising into Black communities really did change a lot of dynamics in terms of Black economics, Black politics, Black wealth, as well as Black health.
Awesome. Yeah. So can you explain in terms of how you got interested in the first place in terms of telling these stories? So why did you choose the career path that you chose in terms of African American studies and history, and now applying that to this concept of business?
Yeah, so I've always had an interest in storytelling, and for me, my formative years in college were informed by a lot of college activism, discovering different types of histories and stories, especially women's history and Black feminism. And so for me, having the opportunity to tell rich stories about Black life is such a privilege. And I got interested in this particular book because, like a lot of Black people who grew up in Chicago, we remember very distinctly the presence of the Black McDonald's Operators Association. In my case, it was Chicagoland and Northwest Indiana. But when I talk to a lot of Black people my age and younger, they also remember Black franchise owners having such an important community role in Black communities.
Got you. Now, when we think about your book, what has the feedback been so far from just franchisees or people who are the franchise owners of McDonald's and other types of franchises? What has the feedback been in regards to telling their story?
I have heard a lot of different reactions. I was invited, I will be there in a couple months, by Jimmy Williams, who franchises a McDonald's in Ferguson, Missouri, to come and spend some time there. I know that the CEO of McDonald's had a copy of his book on his bookshelf. He showed a picture on Instagram, so I hope he reads it carefully. I've met with a lot of people who talked about some of their negative experiences in the franchising industry. When I go on book tours, there's always someone who says, they talk about the racial discrimination struggles of certain franchise companies. They talk about some of the financial risks that they had to deal with in getting overwhelmed by franchising. And I've also met a lot of people who've had very positive memories of Black franchise owners giving them their first job or when they opened up in various communities. And so I think that when you write a book about McDonald's, you find that a lot of people have different relationships to McDonald's, but everyone has an idea of what it is and what it can do in different communities.
Yeah, let's go deeper into that then, right? Because you received a scholarship, is that right, from the Black Franchising Association of McDonald's, or what was your story with that?
I was fortunate to have participated in a Black History Month contest, and the prizes were paid for by the Black McDonald Operators Association. And that was one of the first times I got really curious about what this group of people did outside of owning McDonald's in terms of their connection to community.
All right, so take me through this story then, in regards to franchising in Black America, the franchising of Black America. Like, what does that look like? You started out in the '60s when you were talking about when McDonald's became Black. Can you provide a little more context in regards to what the story looks like?
Yeah, after 1968, when Martin Luther King was assassinated, there were all sorts of concerns about what was going to happen in Black communities as a result of people's deep frustration and anger over King's death. And so, one area where you saw a lot of investment was the area of business development and Black capitalism. And so, I talk about the ways that at this very moment where McDonald's is slowly kind of moving into urban areas, they're deeply concerned about their investment as a result of these uprisings. And so what they argue is that if they're going to be successful in Black communities, they have to have Black franchise owners. And so the first generation of Black franchise owners of McDonald's get into those communities where white franchise owners no longer want to do business. And what McDonald's soon discovers is that Black franchise owners run very successful and profitable businesses. And this is when fast food started to look at that urban market as a potential market for a lot of sales and long-term loyalty to the brand.
No, that's interesting. So you're saying, and I'm not trying to put words in your own mouth. Please tell me if I'm wrong. Before the MLK assassination, franchises in the fast food industry weren't really looking in Black communities to be, I guess, the staple in terms of their profitability and that type of thing.
Right, not
Uh,
very seriously. It was after King's assassination and the entry of the Nixon administration's concentration on Black capitalism and bringing Black business dollars into Black communities that you started to see franchising pick up.
Now that's interesting that you mentioned Nixon because Nixon has a terrible, I guess, reputation in much of Black America in terms of racism or perceived racism and that type of thing. And he, as a Republican president, focusing on this idea of free market capitalism, which we kind of see right now if you think about like opportunity zones, right? Maybe that's like the next phase, 50 years later from what Nixon was doing back in, I guess, the 60s or so. So can you talk about that a little bit more in regards to, I guess, there's a disconnect in my brain in terms of Nixon being like this hardcore Republican who was accused of being a racist and investment in Black communities?
Well, they're not mutually exclusive. Nixon was racist, and he did cause a lot of problems, not only for Black communities broadly, but in his surveillance and crackdown of Black power groups. And so Nixon is not necessarily a hero in the sense that he provided these opportunities. But what Nixon understood was that Black capitalism had the capacity to join a lot of people across a wide ideological spectrum. And so he knew that he could get some Black support by supporting Black business, minority business loans, the Office of Minority Business Enterprises. He knew he could get some people that way, but he also knew that for his white base, they didn't mind a little bit of investment in Black communities as long as it didn't push on any attempt to integrate or equalize resources. So Black capitalism has this way of uniting people who usually wouldn't sit in the same room together. And Nixon understood that, and he used that to his advantage.
Got you. So it was really a political move in terms of, using political capital within the Black communities, but using it to a group of individuals who maybe have the same type of mindset as Nixon in regards to like this capitalistic mindset
Absolutely.
in regards to making money. That's very interesting. I want to talk about that a little bit more then in regards to back in 1968, there were no company or basically no fast food chains in Black America. And if you fast forward to 2020, they're all over the place when you go to Black neighborhoods. And that's been I guess, major talking point or a major issue of discussion as it relates to health in the Black communities when you think about this type of thing. So guess this is a two-part question. Who are running these franchises so successful by selling within their own communities, and then B, what has been your observation as it relates to health concerns 50 years later, when fast food has been so entrenched within Black communities nationwide?
Yeah, so the hyper concentration of these fast food companies within inner city communities is a result of the deep concentration on the business model that has been very financially successful. The fact that a lot of these franchise owners are Black franchise owners, and so there's a sense that they are connected to community and know what's good for community, and therefore sometimes they're trusted to bring these businesses in without any kind of concern about these other issues. And also, communities that have a lot of political, economic, and social capital have been able to keep franchising out. And so the franchise industry has to depend on communities that don't have that kind of power to create competitors or to resist their presence. So there's that one issue. But in terms of the health implications, I think it's important for us to understand that fast food, while it can have very negative health impacts, fast food can also be really practical when people are struggling or when people need fast food cheaply. And so I think it's important for us to spend a little less time maybe criticizing people's food choices and ask, what is a context that forces people to have so few choices in terms of where they can shop, what they can eat, and how they can spend their dollars?
That's interesting. So, I know your expertise is not in policy, right? But if we're looking at that more deeply, what do you think some of those solutions might be? And are there franchise opportunities in that next layer in terms of providing those additional types of choices?
So I'm a big believer that businesses can only do so much. So a business is a place where you can get a good or a service. I don't think businesses have any role or should have any role in providing people with the things that they need, in terms of good schools, good parks, a place to be in the public space. I think we have taxes for that. We have the public good for that. But in the absence of those resources, people will use business to do those things, and I understand that reality. I do think that it's important for us to think about how we are all underwriting these industries to make money, right? So whether it's in tax policies that bring new businesses and don't make them pay taxes for 10 or 20 years, whether it's the fact that they have access to land at a price or in ways that other people couldn't access that land in affordable ways, whether it's the fact that every time a business is created, we, the tax-paying citizens, we pay for those water lines to go in and for a police force to police it if that's what the business owner thinks that they need, that we all have a stake when business opens. And so when we talk about corporate or social responsibility, it's actually the business is paying us back for what we put in. And I think we have to think about that mindset when we make demands, not just on business to do their part, but on the government to do their part for what communities need.
All right, and sorry, I'm taking notes as we talk, and so yeah. So just getting the questions out, and actually, I want to take a quick break, and when we get back, I want to talk a little bit more in regards to just the cornerstone of Black franchisers or franchisees in the community, and also see if there's a connection between the whole Great Migration thing that you talked about in your first book and McDonald's and how they become a cornerstone in the Black community in your second book as well. But before we do that, I'm here with Dr. Marcia Chatelain. Dr. Chatelain is an associate professor of history and African American studies at Georgetown University. She's also the author of Franchise, The Golden Arches in Black America. And today we're talking all about how franchising is the economic engine of the Black community. So if you guys like this content and like what Dr. Chatelain is talking about today, please go ahead and press the thumbs up button. As a matter of fact, on the count of 3, if everyone can press the thumbs up button, I would really appreciate it. 1, 2, 3, go ahead and press the thumbs up button. We really appreciate you for doing that, and share and subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. Actually, Dr. Chatelain, do you have your book near you?
I do.
All right, so make sure you go ahead and pick that up on Amazon or or your favorite bookseller, and check that out because I think it's a great read. So, Dr. Chatelain, I want to talk a little bit about this whole concept of the Great Migration to Chicago, since that's where you're from. And then, is there any association with that and McDonald's, how they became the major franchisor of, I guess, of that particular area? Then, of course, more nationwide. I've had the pleasure of sitting down and talking with Don Thompson when I was a student at Cornell. He was, there, and of course, for you who do not know, Don Thompson was the former president and CEO of McDonald's for many years, and now he's doing some venture capital, private equity type of stuff. I can't remember exactly what he's doing now, but McDonald's is based in Chicago. So, is there any connection, or is it just a weird question to be asking?
No, I think that's a great question. I haven't gotten that one yet. So the ways that the Great Migration kind of fuels this process is the mass migration of Black folks from the Deep South to cities like Chicago creates those urban cores where the hypersegregation happens, where you have the conditions that will boil over throughout the 20th century. So you have people who are paying high amounts of rent for low quality housing. You have a lot of police brutality and surveillance. You have a business marketplace that is mostly white owned, and people feel like they are targets for a lot of disrespect. People are paying very high prices for low quality goods. So all of those conditions that you see boil over in 1968, they're created by the northern cities' response to Southern migrants 50 years earlier. And so the connections, the fact that this is a story that kind of comes together in Chicago, I think is no coincidence, because Chicago has that, black belt ring of segregation. And then you have the economic white flight of the white-owned businesses leaving throughout the 1960s. And so you have a depressed marketplace, and it's the perfect opportunity for Black franchise owners to try fast food franchising as a new business model that will be able to serve a lot of people in the community and also respond to the needs for entry-level jobs, for a place for people to kind of congregate, and for access to cheap food items.
Got you. So in your book, you have a lot of different stories. I think in your New America interview, hopefully I'm not making this up, you were talking about maybe riots. Or did you talk about riots at all?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there we go. You're talking about riots and how, they would pass over I guess Black-owned establishments like the local McDonald's, that type of thing. When social this social pressure became combustible and then exploded into a lot of just terror. I mean, terrible types of things that were happening and a lot of just anger. Can you talk about from your book just some of your favorite stories that and favorite entrepreneurs that you covered?
Yeah, so a lot of the folks in the book are just really interesting people. I had the opportunity to interview Wayne Embry, who had been in the National Basketball Association. I believe he played for the Milwaukee Bucks. And then after he left sports, he went into fast food franchising in Milwaukee. He had a really interesting upbringing in Ohio and talked about, confronting segregation and then going into this business and then leaving to work as in the coaching fields in basketball. There are folks like Roland Jones, who was a manager at a McDonald's in Washington, D.C. the day Dr. King was assassinated. And he watched all of this uprising, and he was sent to Chicago to try to recruit the first Black franchise owner, Herman Petty, who had really wanted to go into business, but really didn't see that entry point until some people brought McDonald's to his attention. And so you see these people through these various connections and their experiences all finding a different path to McDonald's, but that path led them to a level of financial and economic possibility that they couldn't even imagine, a few years earlier. So it's really interesting to hear about, while these men are slowly becoming getting a path into business, there are other folks who are working on trying to desegregate McDonald's in the South. And then there are people like Julian Bond, who we know so much for his career in public service. He's a very big proponent of franchising, and he tries to franchise to Dairy Queen outlets in Atlanta, and it causes all sorts of problems for him. And so you see the different way that these people that many of us recognize in a different context all had this different relationship to franchising as they're trying to see what their next step is after 1968.
It's interesting that you mentioned a lot of athletes getting into franchising as well. One of my mentors when I was a college student at University of Louisville was Junior Bridgman, who has shout out to Junior, shout out to Ryan, who's leading the company now. Who got their start into franchising. Like, they took their capital from playing professional sports and getting into franchising. Another Kentucky person is Jamal Mashburn, who followed the same type of path. Can you talk about that a little bit in regards to what's the makeup of, I guess, Black franchisers or franchisees in terms of like their career beforehand, and then why are so many athletes finding success in the franchising field?
Well, it's an interesting group of people, because those first group of people were kind of invited into the franchising system. The second generation of Black franchisees are more likely people who were college educated, were able to get pretty good corporate jobs, and then kind of took a risk to jump into franchising. By the late 80s and the 90s, when you see so many athletes getting into franchising, they're not just franchising like 1 or 2 restaurants, they're getting they're getting 10 to put in their financial portfolio. So a lot of athletes are able to do it to diversify their portfolio because they have so much access to capital and wealth. For the folks on the ground who have 1 or 2 restaurants, maybe 3, they're the ones who struggle a little bit more under the franchising, because a lot of their capital is tied into just franchising.
Got you. What are the hot franchises, if you know, right now? So one of my good friends, shout out to Jeff, he's does pretty good work, or not pretty good. He does excellent work over at Chick-fil-A in Atlanta. And then I have a few other friends who are in the franchising space. But when you were researching this book, did you focus solely on McDonald's, or did you expand a little more further out in terms of some of the hotter franchise opportunities that are out there?
Yeah, I mostly talked about McDonald's because they were like the first to really focus in on Black communities. And I talk a little bit about folks in KFC and Burger King having success. But I think that on the whole, franchising is very risky. And so a franchise opportunity is only as hot as, much as your capital is, big and your financial portfolio varied. On the road, I've met a lot of people who have lost a lot of money in franchising. And it's because the model is designed that you as a franchise owner have to absorb a lot of liability. And so if you are not financially prepared to deal with the fluctuations that happen with business, you can lose a lot of money. But if you are able to kind of weather those storms and build your portfolio, you can become very wealthy. And so it's one of these things, like all business, it's incredibly risky. I think that people today are concerned that Black franchise owners are still absorbing more risks than their white counterparts because of inequalities within the franchising system.
Well, what are some of those inequalities then in regards to that, where that risk comes from for Black franchise owners?
So recently in Business Insider, McDonald's franchise owners talked about that they felt like they had to absorb the higher cost of doing business in predominantly Black communities. I talk about in my book a number of cases in which people are challenging McDonald's because they argue that McDonald's is redlining them out of the suburbs. So you find a lot of conversations in this sector that mirror the types of ways people talk about housing discrimination. So they say if you're Black, you can only get restaurants in Black communities, and your insurance costs might be higher, your security costs are higher. People are also talking about how some of the modernization requirements of the McDonald's, the touch screens, the, self-service soda, all of those things cut into the bottom line. And so the disparities are interesting because often Black-owned franchises do really well financially. It's just the cost of business is higher for them. And so they lag behind their white peers. And some people continue to argue that it's harder for them to enrich their portfolio with more restaurants.
Yeah, I find that to be very interesting of a subject because on one hand, we have this whole campaign for inclusion, right? And to have fairness as it relates to banking infrastructure or legal infrastructure or insurance and all these different types of things that significantly increase the cost of capital for running a business as a Black American. I did another interview with a guy, one of my fraternity brothers named Sean Rochester, and he has a book called The Black Tax. And in that book, he talks about all the different types of ways that Black businesses and Black people in general are just paying more for stuff, whether you're talking about housing, you're talking about starting a business, you're talking about just so many different types of things. And, with all these diversity initiatives, we are trying to, or I guess the world is trying to, set some of that straight, right? And in terms of like some of those injustices as well. But I think, at least for me, and I want your take on this, an even deeper concern is the reliance upon all of these institutions that have no Black control to quote unquote give us opportunities or give us capital at a cheaper rate, instead of us being able to come together and form these institutions within our communities so that we can guarantee that we get the best rates, we can guarantee that we get lower insurance rates and so on and so forth. So, what is your take on that? And I guess, what do you think about this whole concept of, I guess, inclusionism versus, creating your own?
Yeah, so a lot of this inclusion, and in an excellent book by Keeanga Yamada Taylor called Race for Profit, her framework that she uses that I think is helpful is predatory inclusion. And this is when she writes about the housing market opening up to low-income Black folks, manipulating the fact that there's so much housing discrimination, they can't find houses, and so people are trying to encourage them to buy houses and absorb more risk. So I think that the framework of predatory inclusion helps us understand that every door that's open isn't a door that people should pass through, that you have to really think about how can you safely enter or mitigate your risks of entering. The other issue in terms of, Black banks and Black insurance agencies as economic engines for communities are incredibly limited. And so that's why I'm very cautious about saying, I think it's important for there to be Black-owned businesses, but Black-owned businesses can't be the site to remedy all of these social problems. That's too much pressure on the business, but also business is not designed to do that. Business is designed to maximize profits. People, communities, the public good, the public trust, taxes, a civil society is designed to make decisions about the direction a society goes in. And once those things get too intertwined, you find yourself in this position needing business to prosper, not for the sake of that business, but for the sake of communities. And that kind of strain is why we don't have Black banks and Black insurance agencies at those same rates, right? The pressure of what all of those institutions had to do for Black America was too much. And so I think that we have to be really cautious in our celebration of business, not because a Black-owned business isn't something to celebrate, but we have to understand the limits of its capacity and what it was designed to do and what it wasn't designed to do.
Okay, so I want to go deeper into this conversation or this piece of the conversation because we talk about how Black-owned businesses have, I guess, an outstretched layer of influence, maybe in the Black community, in regards to political influence too, and just influence in terms of being, I guess, that community pillar. So how do we reconcile like Black business owners having like this outsized influence and what is necessary that need to be developed to create a stronger, I guess, Black community?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the business should be one actor among many actors, that the business can't have the final voice or final say or the most influence, that we need to think about convening communities in which people have equal amounts of power because they have equal amount of stakes in what happens. And so I think that while I think it's important for business to play an active role and to be a good citizen, it can't have a louder voice because it has more financial resources than the person down the street. And so I think we all struggle with those types of balances. And that's why I think, community groups making demands of business, pushing back against business really helps all of us in the long run. Oh, I think there was an issue.
Sorry about that, Dr.
Oh,
Chatelain.
no worries.
My internet. I wanted to speak. Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right, sorry about that. I turned my video off for a second, everybody. I think my internet connection is acting a little bit funny. But have you seen the movie The Founder?
Yes, I have.
Yeah, and I found it interesting. It's about Ray Kroc,
Mm-hmm.
who wasn't the founder of McDonald's, but he was the founder as we know it in terms of this big franchise system that has international domination. And one thing that he talked about, and I know it's sensationalized as well, but one thing that he talked about in the movie was this concept of we're not in the hamburger business, we're in the real area, and that's truly the business that they're actually in. And I want to know if there's any link between this concept of being in the commercial real estate as a franchisee, and then what we're seeing now in regards to gentrification of neighborhoods and that type of thing. So is there any link or any type of story that is there to be told between, what's happening with commercial real estate from a franchise perspective, and then also what's going on in Black communities and gentrification?
Yeah, so I think McDonald's property ownership is key to its financial stability, even when there's more market competitors, even when, McDonald's is not as cool as it used to be, it can still survive on the wealth that its real estate brings in. I think that this is important when we think about gentrification because McDonald's does well either way. So if a neighborhood is gentrified and McDonald's is less popular, they still own land and that land value is still rising, even if that franchise owner can't survive on that property anymore. And when land values go down, because McDonald's is in the real estate business, it can build on stores more cheaply. And that's really part of its urban strategy after 1968. It was coming into neighborhoods where land values had been depressed. So McDonald's wins regardless of the situation. But I think that in terms of thinking about gentrification and land use, it isn't just about the price of real estate and the price of land. It's also about the policies that dictate where businesses can and cannot be built. And that's where people, I think, become really critical in creating the type of policy demands and making the kind of organizing moves to try to reduce maybe the presence of fast food by thinking about zoning. And that's something that I think people can play a part in. Even though at times it's hard coming up against big developers, I think those are the spaces in which people don't have to always accept the status quo.
Yeah, no, that's interesting mentioning zoning, because I think you alluded to this earlier in the conversation when you were talking about how more affluent neighborhoods are pushing out these franchises or these fast food franchises,
Mm-hmm.
right? What do you what is the story with that in terms of zoning and the net good of, let's say, or the net good or bad of these fast food franchises, and how they're perceived differently in affluent neighborhoods versus poor neighborhoods?
Yeah, I often say in these talks that the sign of an affluent neighborhood, maybe in 1975, was the absence of McDonald's, and now the conspicuous nature of McDonald's is how you can tell a neighborhood is rich. So the McDonald's won't be orange and, won't be yellow and red. It'll be blue. It'll have, earth tones. It might look like a ski chalet. So there's different ways where communities use their influence to either keep McDonald's out, or if they can't do that, if they can't hold on, they can make demands on what it looks like. And I think that is the way that McDonald's has kind of worn down the resistance of some communities in order to have a presence there. But regardless of kind of where a McDonald's is, that McDonald's will have an influence on how people view fast food, whether it's an occasional treat or an everyday reality. And I think the fact that, the way that McDonald's has appeared in Black community as more than just a meal really points us to all of the ways that communities have been left behind. And so when I think about, some of the stories in my book in which people are protesting against McDonald's and fighting against McDonald's, they're all fighting for different things. Some for Black ownership, some for employment, some for integration, some for get out of our neighborhoods, some for if you're going to come into our neighborhood, how come we can't get other resources? It's a really complicated mix, and I think it's important for us to know those stories so that we don't think it's inevitable for any business to just come into our communities.
Wonderful, wonderful. I'm here with, for the people just tuning in, I'm here with Dr. Marcia Chatelain. Dr. Chatelain is the Associate Professor of History and African American Studies at Georgetown University. She's also the author of Franchise, The Golden Arches in Black America. And today we're talking about how franchising is the economic engine of the Black community. So if you guys like this video that we've been producing today, Dr. Chatelain has done an awesome job of answering the many questions that I've thrown her way. Please go ahead and press the thumbs up button, show us some love on YouTube so that the algorithm can show us some love as well. We really appreciate you doing that, and also sharing and subscribing to our YouTube channel as well. All right, so Dr. Chatelain, in this last little segment, I want you to give your best pitch or your best case for people to buy your book.
Listen, what can I tell you? McDonald's is omnipresent. McDonald's is highly influential, but if you've ever wondered why so many McDonald's are in some neighborhoods and not in others, I will give you that backstory. If you always wondered what are the origins of the ways we talk about health and race, I'll give you that. If you have fond memories of watching Calvin cartoons or Calvin commercials back in the day while watching Soul Train, I'll give you some of that too.
All right, and if people want to get in touch with you to learn more about your work, how can they get in touch with you?
The best place to get in touch with me is at Twitter. So my handle is at Dr. M. Chatelain, DrMChatelain.
Wonderful, wonderful. All right, Dr. Chatelain, well, thank you so much for joining us today. And yeah, if you guys like today's interview, please go ahead and press the thumbs up button. Excuse me, I would also like to thank our corporate sponsor, the Black Business School. And at the Black Business School, we don't just help you climb the corporate ladder, we help you build your own as well. So what we do is help African Americans to obtain a culturally relevant yet practical education in all things building at an affordable price. So people come to us because they're looking for one of three things in their life. They're either looking for additional freedom to spend more time with their family, to travel more, or just to take naps during the middle of the day like me and Boyce do. Or they're looking to leave a legacy behind to their families and their communities. And last but not least, they're looking for additional stability and safety going into their golden retirement years as well. And the Black Business School, we have courses and classes that fit all three of those objectives, mainly surrounding one of three topics: small business and entrepreneurship, real estate investing, and stock investing as well. So please head over to theblackbusinessschool.com. Excuse me, that is theblackbusinessschool.com to learn more. So on behalf of Dr. Marcia Chatelain, my name is Lawrence Watkins. You guys take care, be blessed, and have a wonderful day. All right.
Bye.
Bye.